The wind howled through the empty streets as Lauren Mitchell drove toward the outskirts of town. Her fingers tightened around the steering wheel. Why had she agreed to this? She glanced at her phone, the message still glowing on the screen. Meet me at the old Hartford house. Midnight. Don't be late. It was from David Carter, her ex-boyfriend, the man she hadn't spoken to in 2 years. Lauren's car slowed as the Hartford house came into view. It stood alone, its massive wooden frame battered by time. Broken windows, overgrown vines. A door that hung slightly open, as if inviting her inside. Her heart pounded. This house wasn't just abandoned, it was cursed. Years ago, a family had lived here, the Hartfords. Then one night, they had simply vanished. No bodies, no clues. Just an empty house and whispers of something sinister. Teenagers used to dare each other to enter. Most ran out screaming. Some never came out at all. Lauren stepped out of her car, shivering as the cold air bit at her skin. She checked her phone. 11:58 p.m. 2 minutes until David arrived. She glanced up at the house again. Something about it felt wrong, like it was waiting, watching. Then, the front door creaked open by itself. Lauren froze. She wasn't alone. Lauren's breath hitched. The front door of the Hartford house had just creaked open, on its own. She took a step back, her heart pounding. Was it the wind? Or was someone inside? A voice echoed from within. Lauren, come in. Her blood ran cold. She recognized that voice. It was David, but something about it sounded wrong, twisted, like a voice being forced through someone else's throat. Lauren's instincts screamed at her to run, but her feet stayed planted. She hadn't seen David in 2 years. Why had he asked her to meet him here, of all places? Something was off, and she needed to find out why. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward. The moment her foot touched the doorstep, the door slammed shut behind her. Darkness swallowed the room, and then a chilling whisper brushed against her ear. You shouldn't have come. Lauren's entire body tensed. The door had slammed shut behind her. The house was pitch black, silent, and then that whisper. You shouldn't have come. The voice was right next to her ear, but when she turned, no one was there. Lauren fumbled for her phone, her fingers shaking. She turned on the flashlight. The beam flickered. And then, the light died. Her battery had been at 80% just minutes ago. Now, 0. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Something was very, very wrong. The wooden floor creaked. Lauren froze. Someone, or something, was moving toward her. Slow, deliberate. She held her breath. David? She whispered. Silence. Then, a deep, rasping breath filled the room, and a voice, not David's, spoke from the darkness. He's already inside. Lauren's blood turned ice cold. Lauren's chest tightened. The voice had come from right in front of her. Yet she could see nothing. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the wall, feeling for a way out. Then, the floor creaked. Something moved. It was close. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she shuffled backward. Her hand brushed against something smooth and cold. A door. But this didn't make sense. There had never been a door in this part of the house. She hesitated. Was this a way out? Then behind her, a voice whispered, Run! Lauren didn't think. She yanked the door open and stumbled inside. The moment she stepped through, the door slammed shut behind her. She turned, but there was no handle. She was trapped. Her breath came in short gasps as she looked around, and that's when she saw it. A mirror stood in the center of the room, but the reflection, it wasn't hers. Lauren's breath caught in her throat. The mirror stood in the center of the room, its glass fogged over. She stepped closer, hesitantly raising her hand. And then, the fog cleared. Her heart stopped, because the reflection staring back at her, it wasn't her. The woman in the mirror looked like Lauren. Same blonde hair, same green eyes. But something was off. Her smile was too wide. Her eyes were too dark. And then, she moved, not like a reflection, like she was alive, watching, waiting. Lauren's pulse thundered. She took a step back, but the mirror Lauren stepped forward. And then, in a voice that sounded exactly like hers, it spoke. "You took too long." Lauren's stomach twisted. "What?" The figure's eerie smile widened. "Now you have to stay." Lauren spun around to find a way out, but the door was gone. Only walls. And when she turned back to the mirror, the reflection was stepping out of the glass. Lauren's lungs locked up. The figure in the mirror wasn't just watching her anymore. It was stepping out. One foot emerged from the glass, then another, until it was standing in the room with her. And Lauren, she couldn't move, face to face with herself. The figure tilted its head, grinning. "You shouldn't have come, Lauren." Her voice perfectly copied. Lauren's body trembled. "Who? What are you?" The figure's smile widened. "I'm you, the real you." Lauren's breath hitched. "No, you're not." The figure stepped closer, whispering. "Then why am I the one walking out?" Before Lauren could react, the figure lunged forward. Darkness exploded around her. Her body felt like it was sinking, drowning. She gasped, reaching out. And then, everything went silent. Lauren's eyes snapped open. She was still in the room. But something was wrong. The mirror was in front of her again, and her own reflection stared back. She lifted a hand. Her reflection didn't move, because she wasn't in the real world anymore. She was trapped, and the thing that looked like her, it had taken her place. Lauren slammed her fists against the mirror. "Let me out!" she screamed. Her reflection, or rather, the thing that had taken her place, just smiled. "I told you," it whispered. "You took too long." Lauren's chest heaved. "Please." The figure's eyes darkened. "I've waited years for this." It turned away from the mirror and walked out of the room, leaving Lauren trapped inside. Lauren watched in horror as the imposter entered her life. It stepped out of the house, got into her car, drove away. No one would ever know, because to the world she was still Lauren. And the real Lauren, she was just another soul lost in the Hartford house. Time passed. Days. Weeks. Lauren stopped screaming. There was no one to hear her. But one day, she wasn't alone anymore. A new person entered the room. A man. Terrified. Confused. Just like she had been. Lauren stepped toward the mirror, a slow smile spreading across her face. Her voice was soft. "You took too long." Story 2. It started with a shadow. Claire Thompson sat on her couch scrolling through her phone. The night was quiet. Too quiet. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor, high enough that no one could peek inside. But then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw movement. Her breath caught. A tall, dark figure stood outside her living room window, staring straight at her. Claire's hands went cold. That window was too high for anyone to be standing there. And yet, the figure wasn't moving, just watching. Her heart pounded. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency?" Claire shook as she whispered, "There's someone outside my window." The operator paused. "Miss, you said you live on the 3rd floor?" Claire swallowed. "Yes." Another pause. Then the operator's voice turned dead serious. "Ma'am, we need you to move away from the window. Right now." Claire's pulse raced. The 911 operator's words echoed in her head. "Move away from the window, right now." Her feet refused to move. She couldn't stop staring at the figure outside. Tall, motionless, watching. Then, it tilted its head, and Claire realized something terrifying. It had no face. Claire stumbled backward. Her phone nearly slipped from her fingers. "He's still there," she whispered. The operator's voice was firm. "Lock your doors. Do not look at it. Help is on the way." Claire's stomach twisted. Her apartment had one door, and it was next to the window, which meant she had to move toward it. Her legs felt like lead. Slowly, she stepped forward. And then, the figure breathed against the glass. A long, slow fog spread across the window. It was real, and it was alive. Claire lunged for the door, locking it. Her heart pounded wildly. She turned back, and the figure was gone. Just vanished. A shaky breath left her lips. Maybe, maybe she imagined it. Then, knock, knock. Her body froze. The knock had come from inside the apartment. Claire's entire body locked up. The knock had come from inside the apartment. Her breath shallowed, slowly. She turned around. The hallway leading to her bedroom was dark, silent, but she wasn't alone. A shadow moved. Something was there, inside her home. Her trembling fingers reached for the lamp. Click. The light flickered. For a split second, she saw it. A tall, faceless figure standing at the end of the hallway. And then, the light went out. Darkness swallowed the room. Claire's breath came in short gasps. Her phone. Where was her phone? She reached blindly for it, and then a whisper brushed against her ear. "Let me in!" Claire screamed. Claire stumbled back, her heart hammering. The whisper had been right next to her ear, but she was alone. Right? The room was pitch black. She couldn't see the hallway. She couldn't see the figure. She couldn't see anything, but she could feel it. Something was still here, watching, waiting. Her hands shook as she grabbed her phone. The screen was dead. No battery. Her pulse spiked. It had been at 70% just minutes ago. Then, psst, a faint, buzzing vibration. Her phone screen blinked on. A single message appeared. "I'm already inside." Claire's blood turned to ice. And then, something grabbed her wrist. She screamed and jerked away. Her body slammed into the wall, hands scrambling for a light switch. Click. The room flashed with light. She spun around, and the hallway was empty. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Had she imagined it? Then, the closet door creaked open, and from the darkness inside, a tall figure stepped out. Claire's blood went cold. The closet door had just creaked open, and from the darkness, a tall, faceless figure stepped out, its head tilted slightly, watching her. Even though it had no eyes, Claire's back hit the wall. She was trapped. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. It just stood there. Then, its hand twitched. Long, bony fingers curled inward, like it was reaching for her. Claire's breath hitched. "Stay away," she choked out. The figure didn't listen. It took a slow, shuffling step forward. Then another, and another. Claire lunged for the lamp. She grabbed it and threw it with all her strength. The glass shattered against the figure. But it didn't even flinch. Instead, it spoke. A deep, rasping whisper. "You let me in!" Claire's vision blurred. Her lungs felt tight, like the air had been stolen from the room. She had to get out. Now her eyes darted to the window. She was on the 3rd floor, but she had no other way out. Behind her, the figure lurched forward. Claire had seconds to decide. And so, she jumped. Claire's body crashed through the air. The world blurred, spun. She had chosen to jump, to escape, to survive. But as she fell, she saw something impossible. The figure was outside the window, watching her. The ground rushed toward her. She braced for impact. But it never came. Claire's fall didn't stop. She kept dropping, through the air, through darkness, through nothingness. And then, she landed, back in her apartment, sitting on her couch, exactly where she had started. Claire's hands shook. Had it all been a dream? She turned toward the window. The figure was gone. A shaky breath left her lips. Then, her phone buzzed. New message from unknown. Her stomach twisted. Slowly, she picked up her phone and opened it. "It's okay, Claire. You let me in." Her breath hitched. She turned toward the mirror in the hallway, and her reflection smiled back, but she hadn't moved. Story 3. Ethan Walker glanced at his watch. 11:45 p.m. The subway station was empty. A single fluorescent light flickered overhead. He tapped his foot, waiting for the last train home. Then, a distant rumbling echoed through the tunnel. The train was coming, but as it pulled into the station, Ethan felt something was wrong. The train was old, rusted. Its windows were pitch black, and as the doors slid open, no one stepped out. The station remained silent. Ethan hesitated. Something about this train felt off. Then behind him, a voice whispered, "You have to get on." Ethan froze. The whisper had come from behind him, but when he turned, no one was there. The subway station was still empty. Yet the train waited, its doors wide open. Ethan hesitated. Something inside him screamed not to step in. But another train wouldn't come tonight, and the platform felt wrong, like something was watching him. Slowly he took a step forward, then another, and finally, he stepped inside. The doors slammed shut behind him, the lights flickered, and the train lurched forward. Ethan exhaled, scanning the train car. It was empty, not just of people, but of ads, graffiti, or even route maps. No signs, no posters, just bare metal walls. The windows were pitch black. He couldn't see the tunnel, couldn't see anything. And then the lights flickered again. For a split second, a reflection flashed in the dark glass. A face, but it wasn't his. Ethan's breath caught. That wasn't his reflection. It had been someone else's face, staring back at him. But when he turned, the train was empty. The windows were still black. The silence felt too heavy, too unnatural. Then, a voice whispered, "You shouldn't be here." Ethan whipped around. The voice had come from the seat behind him. His pulse hammered. Slowly, too afraid to look. He took a step forward. He needed to get to the next car. He needed to get out of here. He grabbed the metal door handle and pulled. It didn't budge. Locked. Then the train lights flickered, and in that brief moment of darkness, a figure appeared, sitting right behind him. The lights flickered back on. Ethan's lungs locked. A man sat in the seat behind him, tall, thin. His suit was gray and dusty, like it had been buried underground. His skin pale as bone, and his mouth was sewn shut. Ethan's stomach turned. His heart slammed against his ribs. The pale man tilted his head. And then he began to stand up. Ethan's body locked up. The pale man was standing now. His hollow eyes stared at Ethan. His sewn shut mouth twitched, like he was trying to speak. Ethan's breath hitched. He needed to move. Now Ethan lunged for the next train door. He yanked the handle, hard, still locked. The train rumbled forward, faster. The lights flickered. For a split second, the pale man was right in front of him, his face inches away. Then, darkness. The lights flashed back on. Ethan spun around. The pale man was gone. His chest heaved. What the hell was happening? He turned toward the window. For the first time, the black glass was clear. And what he saw outside wasn't a subway tunnel. It was rows of screaming faces, mouths wide open, trapped inside the walls of the train. And then, a new face appeared. It was his own. Ethan's stomach twisted. His own face was in the window. Screaming, trapped inside the glass. He stumbled backward. His reflection wasn't moving like him. It was pleading, begging, and then it mouthed two words. "Get out!" Ethan whirled around. The pale man was gone. The train lights flickered wildly. He grabbed the door handle again, and this time, it opened. A new train car stretched before him. Rows of seats, empty, no windows, no ads, no exit. Then, a metallic screech filled the air, like the train was tearing itself apart, and something massive began to stir in the shadows. Ethan's blood went cold, because this wasn't just a train, it was alive, and it was hungry. Ethan's breath came in short gasps. The train groaned, metal twisting around him. The walls pulsed, like a beating heart. This wasn't just a train, it was alive, and it wanted to keep him. Ethan spun around. The door he had just come through, gone. No exits, no escape, only endless rows of seats. And at the very end of the car, the pale man stood waiting, his sewn mouth ripped open, and in a voice that wasn't his, he whispered, "You should have never gotten on." Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs. The train was speeding up. His only chance? Jump. He ran. The pale man reached for him. Ethan didn't stop. He threw himself at the emergency door and crashed straight through the glass. Waking up, or not, Ethan hit cold pavement. His body rolled onto the subway platform. He gasped, chest heaving. The train, gone, like it had never been there. Ethan scrambled to his feet. The subway station was normal again. Bright lights, people waiting for the next train. He exhaled, his hands shaking. Maybe it had all been a dream. Maybe. A train pulled into the station. Its doors slid open. And inside, every seat was filled with screaming faces. One of them was his. Story 4. The storm raged outside as Olivia Bennett drove through the dark, winding roads. Her hands tightened on the wheel. She never should have come back, but the letter had been clear. Come home, Olivia. We need to talk. Mom. The problem? Her mother had been dead for 6 months. The old Bennett house stood at the edge of town. Dark, abandoned, waiting. Olivia stepped out of the car, rain soaking her instantly. The porch creaked beneath her feet. Her childhood home looked the same, but something about it felt wrong. She reached for the doorknob, and it turned on its own. The door swung open. A whisper floated from the darkness inside. Welcome home! Olivia's heart pounded. The front door had opened by itself, and that whisper, it had sounded just like her mother. But that was impossible. Her mother had been dead for months. Rain poured behind her. The house beckoned. Olivia took a shaky breath and stepped inside. The air was stale. Dust clung to every surface. The house had been empty since the funeral, hadn't it? Then, the door slammed shut behind her. The lights flickered on. And from the hallway, she heard footsteps. Olivia froze. The sound was slow, heavy, coming from the old living room. She took a step forward, her pulse hammering. Her mother's rocking chair sat in the corner, still, dusty. Then it creaked. It was rocking back and forth, on its own. And then a voice. Her mother's voice whispered, "Why did you leave me?" Olivia's blood ran cold. Olivia's chest tightened. "Why did you leave me?" Her mother's voice echoed through the room, but that was impossible. She was alone. Right? The rocking chair creaked again. And then, a shadow moved. Olivia's breath hitched. A figure sat in the chair now. Its hands rested on the wooden arms, long, thin fingers. The skin, gray and shriveled. And when the figure looked up, Olivia's stomach dropped. It was her mother, or at least what was left of her. Her mother's face was sunken, hollow, her eyes dark and endless. She stared at Olivia with pure sadness. And then, she smiled. "You finally came home." Olivia stumbled backward. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. Then, the chair stopped rocking, and her mother's voice turned cold. "Now you can stay." Olivia's skin crawled. Her mother's lifeless eyes locked onto hers. "Now you can stay." The words hung in the air, heavy, cold, final. Olivia took a shaky step back. This isn't real." The figure in the chair smiled wider. "Isn't it?" Olivia spun toward the door. She grabbed the knob, yanked. It wouldn't budge. She twisted harder. Still locked. The air in the house grew thick, suffocating. The lights dimmed. And then, a voice whispered from the walls. "You left me once, Olivia." The voice was closer now. "You won't leave me again." Footsteps echoed down the hall, slow, deliberate. Olivia's pulse hammered. She turned. A shadow stood at the end of the hallway. Tall, wrong, not her mother, something else. And it was coming for her. Olivia's breath hitched. The shadow at the end of the hall moved closer. Its footsteps echoed, slow and deliberate. The house felt smaller, tighter, like the walls were closing in. And then, it spoke. "You shouldn't have left me, Olivia." The voice was her mother's, but the thing wasn't her mother. Olivia's hands shook as she grabbed a nearby chair. Her only thought, break a window, get out. She swung with all her strength. Crash! Glass shattered. The freezing night air rushed in. She climbed onto the ledge, ready to jump. But then, Cold hands grabbed her ankles. Olivia screamed. The grip was ice cold, unnatural. It yanked her back into the house. She hit the floor hard. The wind howled through the broken window. But when she looked up, the house was still, silent. Had she imagined it? Then, the shadow loomed over her. Its face, her mother's face, was smiling. Olivia's body went rigid. The shadow, wearing her mother's face, stood over her. Its smile stretched too wide. Its eyes were black voids. And then, it knelt down. "Stay with me," it whispered. A cold hand touched her cheek, and suddenly, memories rushed through her mind. Not hers, not human, but something else. Something old, hungry, waiting. Olivia's chest tightened. The house was alive. It had been waiting for her return, waiting to trap her forever. Like it had done to her mother, she had one chance, one way out. She clenched her fists and whispered back, "I never should have come back." Then, she bit down on her lip, hard. She needed pain, a shock, a way to break free. And in that moment, the house screamed. The walls shook, and the shadow vanished. The front door burst open. Cold wind rushed inside. Olivia scrambled to her feet. She ran. Out the door, down the driveway, into her car. Her hands shook as she turned the key. The engine roared to life. She looked up at the house one last time, and in the upstairs window, her mother stood, smiling, waiting. Story 5. Jake Sullivan was never supposed to find it. The hidden door in his new apartment. It was small, covered by old wallpaper, something no one had noticed before. And when he peeled the paper back, there it was, a door with no handle, just a keyhole. And the moment Jake saw it, he felt something was watching him. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. His mind kept drifting back to the door. Had it always been there? Why had the landlord never mentioned it? Then, as he turned over in bed, something cold touched his hand. He jerked upright. A key sat on his pillow. Old, rusted, waiting. His breath hitched. Because he knew it was for that door, and something wanted him to open it. Jake stared at the key. It had appeared on his pillow, like someone had left it there. For him. His fingers trembled as he picked it up. It was ice cold, and somehow, he already knew it would fit the door. Jake stood in front of the hidden door. The air felt heavier, like the room itself was holding its breath. Slowly, he slid the key into the lock. Click. The door creaked open. Inside, a pitch-black room, empty, silent. But then, a whisper crawled through the darkness. "You found me?" Jake's blood ran cold. Because the voice, it was his own. Jake's breath hitched. "You found me!" The whisper echoed from the darkness, and it had his voice. His fingers tightened on the doorknob. Every instinct screamed at him to shut the door, to walk away, but his feet wouldn't move. Instead, he stepped inside. The air was thick, heavy, wrong. The walls were bare concrete, no windows, no furniture, just an old mirror standing in the center. Jake's own reflection stared back at him. But something was off. The mirror, Jake was smiling. Jake wasn't. Jake's chest tightened. His reflection should have copied him. Instead, it took a step forward. Jake didn't move. His pulse thundered. Then, the reflection whispered, "I've been waiting for you," and the glass began to crack. Jake's stomach twisted. The cracks in the mirror spread like veins. His reflection grinned wider. Too wide. "I've been waiting for you." The voice was his, but not his. Jake's body tensed. He needed to leave. Now he spun toward the door. But it was gone. The walls had shifted. No exits. No way out. The only thing left was the mirror, and his reflection was moving closer. The cracks spread like spider webs. The mirror groaned. Jake took a step back. His reflection took a step forward. Closer. Closer. Then, a hand reached through the glass. Jake's blood ran cold. Because the hand, it was his, and it was pulling him in. Jake struggled. The hand gripped his wrist, tight, It was cold, wrong, like touching wet glass. The reflection wasn't smiling anymore. It was pulling, hard. Jake's feet slid forward. His body lurched toward the mirror, into the cracks. Jake tried to fight back, but the grip was too strong. The mirror warped around him, like water. His legs sank in first, then his waist, his chest. He gasped for air. And then, the world went black. Jake's eyes snapped open. He was standing, back in his apartment. The hidden door was gone, like it had never existed. For a moment, his breath slowed. Maybe it was all a dream. Maybe his phone screen blinked on. A message. Thank you for switching places. Jake's chest tightened. Slowly, he turned toward the mirror and saw himself, but the reflection didn't move. Jake's breath hitched. His reflection stared back, but it wasn't moving, not blinking, not breathing, just watching, like a trapped shadow. Jake stepped closer, his own face, motionless behind the glass. Then, the reflection smiled. Jake didn't. His stomach turned. He whispered, "Who are you?" The reflection tilted its head, and in Jake's own voice, it whispered, "I'm you now." Jake's legs buckled. He wasn't in the real world anymore. The one standing in his apartment wasn't him. He was inside the mirror, trapped, stuck, and the thing wearing his face, it turned away, walked toward the door, left. Jake's hand slammed against the glass. "Wait! Stop!" But no one could hear him, because in the real world, he was already gone. Story 6. Emily Carter never liked dolls. Something about their glass eyes always made her uneasy. So when her grandmother left her an old porcelain doll in her will, she wanted nothing to do with it. But she couldn't just throw it away. So she left it in the attic, locked the door, and forgot about it. Or at least, she tried. That night, as Emily lay in bed, she heard it, a soft creaking from the ceiling, like footsteps. Slow, deliberate. She stiffened. The attic. It was right above her room. Then, a faint thud and a whisper. "Don't forget me." Emily's blood ran cold because she lived alone. Emily's heart pounded. The whisper had come from above her, from the attic, but she was alone. Right? She grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight. Slowly, she stepped into the hallway. Her eyes locked onto the attic door. It was closed, but then, creak! It swung open, on its own. Emily's breath shallowed. She had locked that door, but now it stood wide open. Darkness waited beyond it, and then, a thud, like something moving, like something waiting. Emily's hands shook. She had two choices: walk away or see what was inside. And against every instinct, she stepped into the attic. Emily's footsteps echoed as she stepped into the attic. The air was thick with dust. Her flashlight flickered. Boxes and old furniture were stacked high, and in the center of it all, the doll, sitting upright, exactly where she had left it. Or had it moved? Emily's chest tightened. The doll's head was tilted now, its painted lips curved into a faint smile. But she was sure it hadn't been smiling before. Her breath came in short gasps. Then, a soft tapping filled the attic, like tiny porcelain fingers tapping on wood. Emily whirled around, but there was nothing there. She turned back to the doll, and that's when she saw it. Its glass eyes were wet, like it had been crying. Her stomach churned. And then, in the silence of the attic, a whisper filled the air. "Why did you lock me away?" Emily froze, because the voice came from the doll. Emily's legs locked. "Why did you lock me away?" The words hung in the air. Software fragile. Wrong. Her throat dried. Dolls don't talk. They can't. And yet, this one just did. Her fingers tightened around her phone. She took a shaky step back. The doll remained still, but its eyes followed her. Emily's breath hitched. She had to get rid of it. Now she turned to leave, but her phone flickered. The battery was at 80%, then 20%, then 1%, and then The screen died. Total darkness swallowed the attic. Emily's heart slammed. A soft shuffling sound filled the room, like porcelain scraping against wood, like something moving. Then, a whisper right behind her. "Don't go." Emily's blood ran cold. "Don't go!" The whisper had come from right behind her. But she was alone, wasn't she? She spun around. Darkness. Silence. Nothing moved. And yet, she could feel it. Something was there. Watching. Waiting. Emily's breath hitched. She took a step toward the attic door. And then, something brushed against her arm. Cold. Small. Like tiny fingers. Emily jerked away. "No! No, this isn't real!" She reached for the door, but it slammed shut, locking her inside. Her pulse hammered. She turned back to the doll and froze. It was standing now, not sitting. Standing, its head tilted, eyes unblinking. And then, in a soft, broken whisper, it said, "Stay with me." Emily's scream tore through the attic. Emily's scream died in her throat. The doll was standing, its head tilted, watching, waiting. And then, it moved. One small porcelain foot stepped forward, then another. Emily's back hit the wall. There was nowhere to run. Her hands shook as she reached for the door. She yanked, pounded, screamed. Nothing. The doll kept moving, its glass eyes never blinking. Then in a voice that was almost human, it whispered, "You forgot about me." Emily's lungs locked. The doll's shadow stretched across the attic floor. It wasn't small anymore. It was tall, twisted, wrong, and it was right in front of her. Darkness swallowed the attic. Emily felt herself falling. Her body went cold. Her mind slipped away. And then, silence. When she opened her eyes, she was sitting, frozen, unable to move. She tried to scream, but her lips wouldn't open. Her lungs wouldn't breathe. And then she saw it. A reflection in the attic window. Porcelain skin, glass eyes, a painted smile. She wasn't Emily anymore. She was the doll. And the thing wearing her face, it turned toward the attic door and walked away. Story 7. Mia Thompson loved her baby boy. Every night she tucked little Noah into bed, turned on the baby monitor, and watched him sleep peacefully on the screen. But tonight, something wasn't right. The monitor flickered. Static filled the screen. Then, a voice. Software wrong. "He's not alone." Mia's stomach dropped because she was the only one home. Mia's hands tightened around the baby monitor. The voice had been clear. "He's not alone." Her heart pounded. She stared at the screen. Noah's crib sat in the center of the room. Still, quiet. But then, in the corner of the screen, a shadow moved. Mia's breath hitched. The nursery was locked. No one else should be in there. But the monitor flickered again. And this time, she saw it. A tall, dark figure standing next to Noah's crib. It didn't move, just watched. And then, Noah stirred. Mia's pulse spiked. Her baby wasn't alone. She had to get to him. Now Mia raced up the stairs. Her pulse hammered. She gripped the nursery doorknob and twisted. Locked. Her stomach dropped. She had never locked it. From inside the room, Noah whimpered. And then, a whisper. "He's mine now." Mia's blood ran cold. She slammed her fists against the door. "Noah, Mommy's here!" Silence. Then, the baby monitor in her hand flickered. The screen was static, but she could still hear Noah's soft breathing and something else, a low, rasping breath. Right next to him, the screen cleared for 1 second, just one. And in that second, Mia saw it, a figure standing over Noah. Tall, distorted, wrong. Noah's tiny body shivered, his lips trembled. He was trying to cry, but no sound came out. Then, the figure turned toward the camera and smiled. Mia screamed. Mia's scream tore through the house, the figure on the baby monitor. It had smiled at her, like it knew she was watching, like it was enjoying this. Her hands shook. She had to get inside. She backed up and slammed her shoulder into the door. Once, twice. Then, the lock snapped. The door swung open. Mia rushed in. The nursery was silent. The crib, empty. Noah was gone. Her chest tightened. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. She grabbed the baby monitor. The screen was still on. It showed the crib. And in it, Noah was still there, sleeping. But he wasn't in the real crib. He was only in the screen. Mia's stomach dropped. She turned slowly, and in the far corner of the nursery, a shadow moved. Something was standing there, tall, wrong, grinning. Then it laughed, a sound that wasn't human. Mia's vision blurred. She was too late. It had taken him. Mia's legs locked. The shadow in the corner didn't move, but its smile widened. A deep, rasping voice filled the room. "He's mine now." Mia's vision blurred. Number Noah was hers. She had to get him back. Her eyes snapped to the crib. Noah was still there, but only on the baby monitor screen, not in the real world. She stumbled toward it, grabbed the monitor. Her fingers tightened. She didn't know how, didn't know why, but she had to pull him back. And then the shadow lunged. The lights burst. Darkness swallowed the nursery. A cold force slammed into Mia's chest. She gasped for air. Then, a sudden pulling sensation, like she was being ripped away. And in the distance, Noah cried. His real voice, his real body, safe. Mia's eyes fluttered open. She was back in the nursery, the crib full. Noah stirred. She rushed forward, touched his tiny face. Warm, real, alive. She had saved him, hadn't she? Then, Noah's eyes opened, and Mia's stomach dropped. His eyes weren't Noah's soft brown. They were pitch black. And then, in a voice that wasn't his, he smiled. "Mommy." Story 8. Nathan Harris never liked the basement. As a kid, his mother always kept it locked. "There's nothing down there for you," she'd say. Now, years later, the house was his, and the basement, still locked until tonight. Nathan froze. The basement door was wide open. He knew he had never unlocked it, knew he had never even touched the key. And yet, the stairs disappeared into darkness. Something was waiting below, watching. Then, a whisper floated up. "You finally came back." Nathan's blood ran cold, because he had never been down there before. Had he? Nathan's hands clenched. The basement door was still open. A whisper had called his name, but no one else was here. He should have closed the door, should have walked away. Instead, he stepped inside. The wooden steps creaked under his weight. The air grew thick, cold. The farther he walked, the darker it became. His phone flashlight flickered. Then, a new whisper. "Keep going." Nathan's stomach turned. The voice was closer now. But the bottom of the stairs, it never came. He just kept walking, down and down, like the basement had no end. Nathan stopped, his breath shallow. Something felt wrong. The air was too still. And then, a soft breath brushed his neck, cold, slow, and a whisper right behind him. "You're almost home." Nathan spun around. His flashlight died, and the stairs above him were gone. Nathan's chest tightened. The stairs were gone. He was trapped in total darkness. This wasn't a basement, not anymore. The walls felt different. The air was thick, heavy, and somewhere in the shadows, something moved. Nathan reached for the wall, his fingers pressed against it. It wasn't brick or wood. It was soft, warm, moving, like it was breathing. His pulse spiked. He yanked his hand away, and a wet whisper filled the air. "You left me here." Nathan's blood ran cold, because the voice sounded just like his own. A faint glow appeared ahead, just enough to see. The room stretched endlessly. The walls twisted, pulsed, and in the far corner, a figure stood. Nathan's stomach dropped. It was him, a second Nathan, standing motionless, staring, smiling. Then in a voice that wasn't quite human, the second Nathan whispered, "You shouldn't have come back." Nathan's legs locked. The thing in the corner, it had his face, his eyes, but the smile, it was too wide, too wrong, and it wasn't blinking. Nathan took a step back. The other him? It took a step forward. Its voice was low. Software familiar. You left me here. Nathan shook his head. I don't know you. The other Nathan tilted its head. But I know you. It took another step. And then it laughed. The walls shuddered. Nathan's vision blurred. And then he saw something. A memory. A little boy standing at the basement door, locked inside, screaming, "Let me out! Please!" Nathan's breath hitched. He didn't remember this. Did he? The other Nathan's smile widened. You forgot about me. Nathan's stomach twisted, because suddenly, he wasn't so sure he had always been alone. Nathan's heart pounded. The other him took another step. Its eyes gleamed. You left me here. Nathan shook his head. No, I didn't. I don't remember this. The walls shuddered, and the whisper came again. But I remember you. Nathan's vision blurred. More memories flooded back. A little boy in the basement, alone, forgotten, crying, his mother's voice from upstairs. We don't talk about him. Nathan's blood ran cold. This wasn't a stranger. This was him, or at least the part of him his family had left behind. The other Nathan smiled. It's your turn now. Nathan stumbled back. The walls twisted, pulsed, closed in. The air thickened. He gasped, fighting to stay, fighting to remember who he was. But the other him, he just stood there, smiling, watching, waiting. And then Nathan fell backward into the dark, and everything vanished. Nathan's eyes snapped open. He was standing in his house, in the living room. The basement door? Locked again. The house was silent, normal. For a moment, he almost laughed. Maybe it had all been a dream. Maybe. His phone buzzed. A new text message. Thanks for switching places. Take care of my life. Nathan's chest tightened. He turned to the mirror. And his reflection? It didn't move. Story 9. Logan Parker just needed a place to stay for the night. A last-minute Airbnb. It was cheap, remote, perfect, or so he thought, until he arrived and saw the note on the door, scrawled in messy handwriting, "Do not stay past midnight." Logan laughed it off. He should have listened. The inside was normal, a little dusty, a little cold, but fine. He dropped his bag, checked his phone. No signal. Typical. Then, a creak from the hallway, like someone was inside. Logan's chest tightened. He was supposed to be alone. Logan's muscles tensed. The creak had come from the hallway, but he was alone, right? He grabbed his phone, still no signal. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. 11:47 p.m. Then, the hallway light flickered, and a whisper crawled through the air. You shouldn't be here. Logan whipped around. The whisper had come from the end of the hall, where a door now stood wide open. A door he was sure hadn't been there before. The darkness beyond it was thick, heavy. Something moved inside. Slow, shifting. His stomach twisted. Then, a shadow stepped forward, not walking, gliding. And then, the lights went out. Logan's breath hitched. The lights were gone. Total darkness swallowed the house. And in the hallway, something was there, waiting, watching, moving. Logan reached for his phone flashlight. His fingers fumbled, shaking. Then, a whisper. Why did you come? His chest clenched. It was right next to him, breathing, slow, heavy, wrong. The flashlight flickered on, and in the dim glow, he saw it. It was tall, thin, distorted, its arms too long, its body swayed, and its face, it had no face, just smooth, pale skin, like it had never been human. Then, it tilted its head, and Logan felt it smile, even though it had no mouth. Logan's pulse thundered. The thing in the hallway stood still, swaying, watching, its faceless head tilted slightly, like it was studying him. Then, it took a step forward. Logan stumbled back. His flashlight flickered. He scanned the hallway, looking for a way out. Then out of nowhere, a new door appeared. Right beside him, slightly open, like it had been waiting. The faceless thing stopped moving. Then it whispered, "You can't leave." Logan didn't think. He lunged for the door, shoved it open, and fell through. Darkness swallowed him. The air felt wrong, heavy. Then a clock ticked, loud, echoing. He turned and saw a mirror. His reflection stared back, except it was smiling, and Logan wasn't. Logan's breath caught. His reflection in the mirror, it was grinning. Too wide, too wrong. And then it blinked. Logan hadn't blinked. His stomach twisted. He looked around. The room was identical to the Airbnb, but something felt off, like it wasn't real. The walls were too smooth, the air too still. And then the mirror version of him spoke in his own voice. "It's your turn now." Logan's body froze. His reflection lifted its hand and reached out, straight through the glass. Logan tried to step back, but he couldn't move. Something pulled him forward. The reflection switched places. Logan fell into the mirror, trapped. The reflection stepped away from the mirror. Now, it was real. It stretched, adjusted its jacket, then picked up Logan's phone. The screen flashed 12 a.m. Midnight. Too late. It smiled at the mirror, at Logan, then walked toward the door, leaving him behind, forever. Story 10. Isaac Reed hated working late, especially alone. The office was too quiet at night, too empty. But tonight, it didn't feel empty. It felt watched. And then the vent above his desk creaked, a soft scratching sound. Isaac's skin prickled because it sounded like breathing. He glanced up. The vent cover was slightly loose. Had it always been like that? Then a whisper drifted down. "Don't look." Isaac's stomach dropped because he hadn't said anything. Isaac's hands tightened on his desk. The whisper had come from above him, from the vent. His throat dried. Slowly he grabbed his phone, turned on the flashlight, and aimed it up. The light hit the metal grate. For a second, nothing. Then, two eyes blinked. Isaac's blood ran cold. Someone was up there, watching him. And then, the vent cover shifted. Something was crawling forward. Isaac stumbled back. His chair toppled over. His pulse hammered. Then, the whisper came again. "I said don't look." The vent burst open, and something fell through. Isaac's body locked. The vent rattled. And then something dropped, hard, fast, wrong. It hit the floor on all fours. Thin, twisted, human-shaped, but not human. Its limbs bent the wrong way. Its skin pale and stretched. And when it lifted its head, Isaac's breath caught. It had his face. The creature stared at him. Wide, unblinking eyes. Its lips curled. A perfect copy of his own smile. Then it whispered, "I've been watching." Isaac's stomach twisted. His own voice, but not his. Isaac backed away. His shaking fingers grabbed his phone. No signal. The office was too quiet, too empty, except for the thing in front of him. It took a step forward, then another, and in a soft, breathy whisper, it said, "I think it's my turn now." Isaac's chest tightened. The thing moved closer. Its smile widened. Too wide, too wrong. And then it spoke again. "I've been waiting a long time." Its voice was his, but empty, hollow, like it was practicing. Isaac stumbled back. His hands fumbled for something. Anything. His phone, his keys, a weapon. But the thing didn't stop. It tilted its head, watching, studying. Then it mimicked his movements, perfectly, like it was learning to be him. And then it whispered, "You don't need this life anymore." Isaac bolted. He sprinted toward the office door. His heart slammed against his ribs. His fingers grabbed the handle and yanked, locked. His stomach dropped. He turned back. And the thing was right there. It raised a hand, touched his face, and then everything went black. Isaac's mind spun. Darkness wrapped around him. A cold weight pressed against his chest. He tried to move, tried to breathe, but he couldn't. And then a voice whispered in his ear, "Don't fight it." Isaac's vision blurred. Shapes, shadows. His office reappeared. But something was wrong. He wasn't standing. He was watching. From inside the vent, down below. Someone else stood in his place. Looked like him. Moved like him. A perfect copy. It stretched, adjusted his tie, picked up his phone. Then it looked right at him, through the vent, and smiled. My turn now. Story 11. Zoe Mitchell worked late. Every night she took the same elevator down. Lobby, parking garage, home. But tonight, the elevator did something different. It stopped at a floor that didn't exist. The doors slid open. Cold air rushed in. The number above the door? -1. Zoe froze. Her office building didn't have a basement, but the elevator thought it did. And then, a whisper from the dark hallway. "Come in." Zoe's stomach dropped, because she was still alone. Wasn't she? Zoe's breath caught. The elevator had stopped at -1. A floor that wasn't real. The doors stood open, dark, waiting. Then, a whisper from the hallway. "Come in." Zoe's stomach twisted. She reached for the close door button, but it didn't work. The elevator wasn't moving. Her phone screen flickered, no signal. The hallway beyond the doors stretched endlessly. Dim lights, cold air. It didn't look like part of her building. It looked like something else. Then, footsteps, slow, echoing, coming closer. Zoe's hands trembled. Then a voice, right outside the doors. "You've been here before?" Zoe's pulse pounded. "You've been here before." The voice was soft, familiar, but she had never been here. Had she? The footsteps grew louder. Someone was coming. Zoe's finger jammed the close door button. Nothing. The elevator wouldn't move. She turned back to the hallway. A figure stood there, still, watching. She couldn't see its face, but she could feel it stare. Then, it tilted its head. "You don't remember me?" Zoe's stomach turned. Because the voice? It sounded like hers. The figure took a step forward, closer. Zoe's breath hitched. She had to get out. Now then, a hand shot through the doors, gripping the edge of the elevator. Fingers too long, too thin. And then in a voice that wasn't hers anymore, it whispered, "Let me in." Zoe's body locked. The hand gripped the elevator door. Thin, wrong. The fingers twitched. Its nails were too sharp. Then, it pulled, forcing the doors open. Zoe staggered back. The figure stepped inside. Her breath caught. It was her. Same face, same clothes, same hair. But the eyes, they were black, hollow. And then it smiled. "I've been waiting." Zoe's hands shook. She slammed the elevator buttons. Nothing worked. She was trapped. Her reflection. Her double weight took another step. Then it reached for her face. Cold fingers brushed her cheek. And in a soft whisper, it said, "Your turn to stay." The lights flickered. Zoe's scream never made it out. Zoe's vision blurred. Her double's cold fingers gripped her face. The elevator groaned. The walls shifted. And then, the world spun. She felt herself falling, sinking, like she was being pulled away. Zoe's eyes snapped open. She was standing in the hallway, outside the elevator. The doors were closing, and inside, someone stared back at her, trapped, pounding against the glass, screaming, her own face, her own voice, begging to be let out. Then, the doors sealed shut, and the elevator descended, taking her old self somewhere below, somewhere she'd never escape. Zoe, or what looked like her, took a deep breath. Her lips curled into a small smile. She adjusted her coat, checked her phone. Then, she walked toward the exit, like nothing had ever happened, like she had always belonged here. And behind her, in the empty hallway, a faint whisper lingered. "See you soon." Story 12. Ethan Hayes was home alone. A quiet night, a normal night, until he heard the knock. Software rhythmic. He checked the time. 2:33 a.m. His stomach tightened. No one should be at his door this late. Then, a voice through the door. "Let me in!" Ethan's breath caught, because it sounded exactly like him. Ethan's chest tightened. The knock came again. Software steady. Wrong. And then, the voice. "Let me in." His own voice. Ethan stumbled back. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. His phone screen glowed. No missed calls, no messages. No reason for anyone to be here. Slowly he crept toward the peephole. The hallway was dimly lit, and standing outside his door was him. Same face, same clothes, same empty stare. Ethan's pulse pounded. Then in a whisper too soft to be human, it said, "You're in my home." Ethan's breath hitched. The figure outside his door. It was him. Same face, same eyes, same voice. But it wasn't human. Not really. Then, another knock. Louder, sharper, and a whisper through the door. Ethan's legs locked. The door slowly creaked open. An inch, then another. Beyond it, nothing but darkness. But he knew. Something was there. Watching. Waiting. Then, the whisper came again. "You don't belong here." Ethan stumbled back. The figure outside moved forward. One slow, silent step. Into his apartment. His own face. His own eyes. But something was wrong. The skin was too smooth. The smile was too wide. And then, it spoke. "Time to go." Ethan spun toward the window. He could run. He had to run. Then, a hand gripped his wrist. Ice cold. Too strong. His double's voice dropped to a whisper. "You don't get to stay." The lights flickered, and then Ethan's world vanished. Ethan's hands shook. He grabbed his phone, tried to dial 911. The screen flickered, then went black, dead. His stomach churned. The knocking grew frantic. Then, a slow, twisting sound. The doorknob. It was turning. Ethan bolted backward. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. The lock should have held. It shouldn't be turning. Then, the door creaked open, just an inch, enough for the whisper to slip through. "Let me take my place." Ethan's blood ran cold, because the door was unlocking from the inside, by itself. Ethan's vision blurred. The room spun. The cold hand tightened around his wrist. His double grinned. Too wide, too wrong. Then, it whispered, "Time's up." And Ethan fell. Darkness swallowed him. His chest tightened. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. Then, everything stopped. And when his eyes snapped open, he wasn't in his apartment. He was outside the door, looking in, watching, trapped. Inside, his double stretched, rolled his shoulders, like he had worn a new body. His body. It grabbed Ethan's phone, checked the time. 2:34 a.m. Then, it turned toward the door, toward him, and smiled. A perfect human smile. Then it closed the door, locking Ethan outside. Forever.